You resemble a server in that outfit. Cruel laughter erupted, transforming the CEO's daughter into entertainment at the center of a billion-dollar gathering. However, mere moments afterward, as the pompous billionaire clan boasted about their $750 million agreement, the young woman calmly raised her phone and requested its termination. The entire venue went silent, all attention focused on the girl they had ridiculed. Within moments, their $750 million dynasty collapsed around them. Olivia positioned herself at the ballroom's perimeter, her back against the massive windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. The urban illumination sparkled beyond, creating a peaceful backdrop against the brilliant shine of the overhead chandeliers. Her outfit was simple black, no luxury brand labels, no decorative elements, simply elegant cuts that modestly embraced her silhouette. Her ebony hair cascaded in natural waves, untouched by professional styling. Her complexion was natural, no cosmetics, no shine, merely her authentic features, attractive in a manner that didn't demand notice. At 24, she came from one of America's most affluent families, yet her appearance wouldn't reveal this truth. Her father had instilled in her from childhood the importance of self-control, allowing her deeds to speak more powerfully than extravagance. Never flaunt, he had advised during her youth, his tone calm as he adjusted his necktie in their expansive mansion. Your value doesn't lie in your attire, but in your accomplishments. Tonight, however, surrounded by billionaires and their arrogance, her modesty made her vulnerable. The charity event was a performance, a brilliant platform where wealth and influence unfolded in real time. Crystal stemware chimed, stilettos tapped against marble surfaces, and every chuckle seemed rehearsed. The atmosphere was thick with costly fragrances and ambient. Billionaires and their relatives socialized, their conversations boisterous as they discussed transactions, investments, and social hierarchies within their circle. Olivia had entered discreetly, hoping to remain unnoticed, her compact purse secured beneath her arm. She attended to witness the $750 million investment agreement her father had developed for months with the Harringtons, a family notorious for their ruthlessness and their compulsion to control every environment. She had overheard her father that morning, his voice subdued over breakfast in their kitchen. "They're predators, Olivia," he had said, stirring his cup. "However, their resources could transform everything for us." She had acknowledged this, already preparing for the evening ahead, understanding she would enter a dangerous situation. She located a position near the windows, the cool glass providing a small comfort against the crowd's intensity. Her hands rested clasped before her, her stance composed yet vigilant. She wasn't there to create drama or demonstrate anything. She simply wanted to comprehend the players her father was dealing with and view the agreement through his perspective. Before she could settle into the moment, a voice pierced through the conversational buzz. Trevor Harrington, the billionaire's son, approached confidently, his custom suit gleaming beneath the illumination, his sneer sharp enough to wound. He appeared to be in his late 20s, all polished hair and privilege, the type of person who believed charm could be purchased. He stopped uncomfortably close, his cologne overpowering, and leaned in. "You resemble a server in that outfit," he declared loudly enough for nearby tables to overhear. Heads pivoted, waves of laughter spread, sharp and malicious like a blade cutting through air. Olivia's grip tightened on her purse, yet her expression remained steady, her gaze meeting his without wavering. She remained silent. Her stare was sufficient to make him shift momentarily before he intensified his attack with a grin. A woman across the table, her earrings dangling like crystal fixtures, tilted her head and examined Olivia closely. She was Claire, a socialite famous for her cutting remarks and sharper social media presence, constantly seeking attention. "Darling, did you take that dress from your mother's wardrobe?" she inquired, her voice overflowing with false sympathy. The table exploded with laughter again, some applauding as if witnessing entertainment. Claire reclined, sipping her champagne, her eyes never leaving Olivia, anticipating a break in her composure. Olivia's lips separated briefly, as if she might respond. Instead, she adjusted her purse, her movements intentional, and let her silence provide the answer. The room's amusement seemed amplified, but Claire's smile twitched, as if she had expected more resistance. If this narrative is resonating with you currently, take a moment to grab your device, press that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It means everything to experience these moments together. Let's continue exploring these stories as one. The amusement intensified, a surge washing over the tables. A woman in a sparkling crimson gown, her lips painted to compliment, leaned forward from her position. Marissa Harrington, Trevor's mother, possessed the ability to smile while inflicting pain. Her eyes gleamed with malevolence as she spoke, her voice carrying across the room. CEO's daughter, she appears more like an impoverished student, she said, emphasizing each word for maximum impact. The table erupted, their laughter now louder and more confident, as if they had discovered their evening's entertainment. A gentleman in formal wear, his cufflinks likely worth more than Olivia's complete ensemble, shook his head and mumbled, "Her father must feel embarrassed bringing her here." The comment stung, sharp and personal, yet Olivia didn't react. She smiled faintly, a small curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes, and took a slow drink of her water. The glass felt cool in her hand, anchoring her as the room spun its venom. A younger man, perhaps a Harrington relative, leaned forward, his tie slightly askew, his smile broad and careless. This was Derek, the type who followed the family's lead without question, always eager to join the attack. "Hey, no disrespect," he said, raising his hands as if being cordial. "But you're positioned by the window as if you're awaiting transportation. Are you certain you're at the correct function?" The table roared, some slapping the surface, their beverages spilling. Olivia's shoulders tensed momentarily before she turned slightly, her gaze catching the city lights outside. She didn't respond, but the way she angled her head, as if studying Derek's expression, made his smile falter. The laughter persisted, yet several guests exchanged looks, sensing something unspoken in her stillness. The table had become a battlefield. Every glance served as ammunition, every whisper as an attack. A young woman with flawless blonde ringlets, her dress a waterfall of sequins that proclaimed wealth, leaned toward her companion and stage whispered, "Why is she even present? She doesn't fit in." Her friend, a guy with a Rolex gleaming on his wrist, chuckled and added, "Perhaps she's lost. Someone should direct her to the staff entrance." The table roared again, glasses clinking as they celebrated their own cruelty. Olivia placed her glass down, her movements slow and deliberate, like positioning a chess piece on a board. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her silence was a barrier they couldn't overcome, a quiet resistance that made their laughter sound empty. A server paused near Olivia, his tray balanced carefully, his eyes briefly meeting her stained dress with a flicker of compassion. He was young, approximately her age, his uniform crisp but his hands weathered from extended shifts. He offered her a fresh napkin, his voice low. "Ma'am, would you like another?" Olivia met his gaze, her expression softening just enough to acknowledge his kindness. She accepted the napkin, their fingers briefly touching, and nodded slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The moment was small, yet it cut through the room's noise, a reminder that not everyone was participating in the Harringtons' game. The server moved on, but several nearby guests noticed, their laughter fading as they watched Olivia fold the napkin neatly in her lap. Dinner commenced, and the atmosphere shifted momentarily. Servers moved through the room, plates clattering softly as they served. Olivia lifted her fork, her hands steady, and listened as the conversation turned to the deal. The Harringtons were in their element now, throwing around figures and forecasts as if they controlled the future. Trevor leaned back in his chair, his voice loud and smug. "This agreement is going to revolutionize the industry," he said, glancing at his father, Richard Harrington, who nodded with the confidence of someone who had never been refused. Richard was the patriarch, his gray hair slicked back, his suit tailored to perfection, his presence dominating the room. Olivia tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. She spoke up, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the noise. "The market's unstable currently. Your forecasts don't consider the tariffs arriving next quarter or the supply chain problems in Asia." The table went quiet for a beat. An older businessman, his tie loosened and his face weathered from years in boardrooms, raised an eyebrow. "She's not incorrect," he said, almost to himself. "That's more insightful than my advisor's analysis." Several others nodded, their expressions shifting from mockery to curiosity. A woman in an emerald dress leaned toward her husband, whispering, She understands her subject." The husband nodded, his eyes lingering on Olivia, as if seeing her for the first time. Trevor's smirk faltered, his fingers tightening around his glass. "Lucky guess," he snapped, tossing his napkin onto the table. But the atmosphere had changed. The laughter faded, replaced by cautious interest. People were viewing Olivia differently now, as if trying to determine what they had missed. A man in a pinstriped suit, his hair thinning and his voice oily, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at Olivia. This was Victor, a Harrington ally who built his fortune brokering deals and crushing anyone in his path. "You speak confidently for someone who appears to shop at second-hand stores," he said, his tone mockingly curious. "Where did you learn to sound so intelligent? Community college?" The table snickered, several clapping as if it were a clever insult. Olivia paused, her fork hovering over her plate, then set it down with a soft clink. She looked at Victor, her eyes steady, and asked, "Where did you learn to evaluate people by their clothing?" The question was simple, delivered without venom, yet it landed like a slap. Victor's face reddened, and the table's laughter stuttered, several guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The moment didn't last. Trevor, perhaps sensing the shift, stood up, his movements theatrical. He grabbed his wine glass and strolled toward Olivia, his steps slow as if savoring the attention. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he accidentally spilled red wine across her dress. The liquid splashed over the black fabric, soaking through, dripping onto the floor. "Oops, sorry," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "At least now it compliments your inexpensive outfit." The room exploded in laughter, louder than before, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Marissa clapped her hands, delighted, and added, "If she were truly a CEO's daughter, she'd be wearing luxury brands." The table raised their glasses, celebrating their cruelty, their eyes gleaming with entertainment. Several guests looked away, their faces tight as if they knew this had crossed the line. A woman in a silver gown, her hair piled high, stood up to join the frenzy. She was Evelyn, a distant Harrington relative who thrived on gossip and social climbing. She walked over to Olivia, her heels clicking loudly, and held up her phone, capturing a photo of the wine-stained dress. "This is going directly to my followers," she said, her voice gleeful. "They'll enjoy seeing the CEO's daughter looking disheveled." The table cheered, some pulling out their own phones, the flashes illuminating the room. Olivia's hand paused on the napkin, her fingers curling slightly, but she didn't look at Evelyn. Instead, she reached for her glass, took a slow sip, and set it down with a deliberate clink. The room's energy shifted just a fraction as several guests hesitated, their phones lowering as if they sensed something wasn't right. Olivia looked down at the stain, her fingers brushing the wet fabric. Her fists tightened momentarily, then relaxed. She stood, her movement slow and graceful, and faced Trevor. Her voice was soft but sharp, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Do you genuinely believe appearance is everything?" The question hung in the air, simple but heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it, his confidence cracking. A man at the table, his face flushed from wine, blurted out, "That's exactly her father's composure." Several guests shifted in their seats, their laughter fading into awkward coughs. Olivia didn't wait for a response. She picked up a napkin, dabbed at her dress, and sat back down, her eyes sharp as ice. A man in a corner booth, his suit wrinkled and his eyes darting, leaned forward, whispering to his table. This was Paul, a mid-level investor who clung to the Harrington's success, always eager to prove his loyalty. "I bet she's just here to gather information for her dad," he said loud enough for Olivia to hear, probably taking mental notes to report back to him. The table chuckled, several nodding as if it made perfect sense. Olivia's hand paused on her clutch, her fingers tracing the edge. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting Paul's, and asked, "What makes you think I need to take notes?" The question was calm, almost curious, but it carried a weight that made Paul shrink back, his laugh dying in his throat. The room's chatter dipped, several guests exchanging glances, as if they were starting to wonder who she really was. The Harringtons weren't finished. Richard leaned forward, his voice booming with authority, his eyes locked on Olivia. "Your father is about to sign a $750 million deal with us," he said, his tone heavy with condescension. "You're nothing here," Marissa chimed in, her smile venomous. "If you're intelligent, you'll sit quietly and keep your mouth shut." The table erupted again, treating Olivia like a prop in their show. Several guests shook their heads, their expressions darkening as if they knew this had gone too far. A woman in a blue dress muttered to her companion, "This is becoming ugly." Olivia didn't move. She pulled out her phone, her fingers steady, and started typing. A young woman at a nearby table, her necklace sparkling under the lights, leaned forward, her voice loud and teasing. She was Laya, a fashion influencer who lived for attention, her every move calculated for likes. "Girl, you should have at least borrowed some jewelry," she said, holding up her own diamond bracelet. "This is a gala, not a book club." The table laughed, some mimicking her gesture, flashing their own accessories. Olivia's eyes flicked to Laya's bracelet, then back to her face. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low but clear. "Does that bracelet make you feel important?" The question was so direct, so devoid of malice that Laya froze, her hand dropping to her lap. The laughter at her table stuttered, and several guests turned away, their faces tight with secondhand embarrassment. The room didn't notice at first. They were too busy laughing, too caught up in their own power. But then Olivia held the phone to her ear, her voice low but clear. "Dad, I want this deal canceled. Right now." The words landed like a bomb. The laughter stopped. Glasses froze midair. Richard's face went slack, his fork clattering onto his plate. "Who do you think you are to interfere?" he snapped, standing so fast his chair scraped the floor. But then her father's voice came through the phone, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If my daughter says so, the deal is off." The hall went silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy and suffocating. A man in a navy suit, his glasses perched on his nose, stood up, his voice trembling with indignation. This was George, a Harrington business partner who prided himself on his connections. "This is outrageous!" he shouted, pointing at Olivia. "You can't just waltz in here and ruin a deal like that." The room buzzed, some nodding in agreement, others whispering in shock. Olivia didn't look at him. She slipped her phone back into her clutch, her movements calm, and folded her hands in her lap. The lawyer, who had just entered the room, paused, glancing at her, then continued toward her with the folder. George's face reddened, his voice rising, but Olivia's silence was louder, a quiet power that made his outburst seem small. Olivia set the phone down, her expression unchanged. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The Harringtons were unraveling. Trevor's hands shook as he reached for his glass, spilling more wine. Marissa's smile vanished, her face pale as she clutched her necklace, her fingers trembling. Richard stammered, "Mr. CEO, please let us explain." But the line was already dead. Guests started whist, pairing, their voices a low buzz that filled the room. A woman in a gold dress pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Another man leaned toward his wife, muttering, "Did she just—" Olivia sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes scanning the room as if taking it all in. A man in a dark suit entered the ballroom, his steps quick and purposeful. He was a lawyer, his briefcase clutched tightly, his face grim. He walked straight to Olivia and handed her a folder. She opened it, glanced at the papers, and nodded. Then she stood, her voice steady but firm. 37. "Here's the evidence," she said, holding up the documents. "The contract was voided in the system 10 minutes ago. You won't see a single cent from this deal." The crowd gasped, some pulling out their phones to record, others leaning forward to catch every word. 49. The Harringtons collapsed into their seats, their faces drained of color. Trevor stared at the floor, his hands gripping the table as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. A woman in a corner, her shawl slipping off her shoulders, stood up, her voice shaking with desperation. She was Diane, a Harrington family friend who had staked her reputation on their success. "You're making a mistake," she said, her eyes wide as she pointed at Olivia. "You're throwing away years of planning." The room turned to watch, the tension thick. Olivia closed the folder, her finger steady, and looked at Diane. "The mistake was yours," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "You assumed I was nobody." Diane's mouth opened, then closed, her shawl falling to the floor as she sank back into her chair. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others filming the exchange, the weight of Olivia's words settling over the room. The room was chaos now. One of the Harringtons, a cousin with a loud voice and a bad tie, screamed, "You've destroyed our family's future." Marissa gasped, her voice trembling. "You don't understand the consequences." But Olivia didn't flinch. She closed the folder, her movements precise, and handed it back to the lawyer. Guests were on their feet now, some shaking their heads, others whispering furiously. A woman in a gold dress muttered, "I knew something was off about her." A man nearby nodded. "She's not just some nobody." The air was thick with shock, with realization, with the weight of what had just happened. A man at the edge of the room, his suit slightly too big, clutched his phone, his face pale. He was Mark, a junior executive who had been riding the Harringtons' wave for years. He stepped forward, his voice shaky but loud. "You can't do this," he said, his eyes darting between Olivia and the crowd. "You're just a kid playing with power you don't understand." The room hushed, waiting for her response. Olivia turned to him, her eyes steady, and said, "I understand power better than you ever will." The words were quiet, but they hit like a thunderclap. Mark stumbled back, his phone slipping from his hand, the screen cracking as it hit the floor. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some shaking their heads, others filming the moment. Olivia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression softening for the first time all night. She slipped it back into her clutch and turned toward the door. The crowd parted as she walked, her steps slow but steady, her stained dress somehow looking regal now. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. The Harringtons sat frozen, their empire crumbling in real time. Phones around the room lit up with notifications, bank alerts, emails, panicked messages. The family's accounts were frozen, their assets locked, their deal dead in the water. Trevor's face was ashen, his eyes fixed on the table. Marissa clutched her husband's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. A woman in a velvet dress, her hands trembling, stood up, her voice breaking as she spoke. She me e. As Sophia, a Harrington ally who had built her career on their name. "You're ruining everything," she cried, tears smearing her mascara. "Do you know what this means for us?" The room turned to Olivia, waiting for her reaction. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and turned back just enough to meet Sophia's eyes. "I know exactly what it means," she said, her voice steady, almost gentle. The words landed like a final blow, and Sophia sank back into her chair, her hands covering her face. The crowd's whispers grew frantic, phones flashing as they captured the moment. A man stepped into the room and everything changed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding without a single word. Olivia's husband. He didn't need an introduction. The way the room shifted said it all. Guests straightened up, their whispers dying out. Richard tried to stand, his voice shaky. "We can fix this," he said, but it sounded desperate, like a plea. Trevor looked away, his hands trembling. Marissa's eyes darted to the floor, her confidence gone. Olivia's husband didn't speak. He just walked to her side, his hand brushing hers lightly. She looked up at him, and for a moment, her face softened, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. The fallout was swift. The next morning, headlines screamed across every major outlet. A single call from the CEO's daughter destroyed a $750 million empire in seconds. Social media was relentless. A video of Trevor spilling the wine went viral, shared thousands of times with captions calling him out. He was dropped from his family's company board within hours. Marissa's charity foundation, built on her public image, lost its biggest sponsors by noon. Richard spent weeks in meetings trying to salvage what was left, but the numbers didn't lie. Their empire was gone, dismantled by a single call. Evelyn's photo of Olivia's stained dress backfired, the comments tearing her apart for her cruelty. She deleted her account by the end of the day. Olivia didn't stay to watch it unfold. She left the gala with her husband, her steps steady, her head high. The next day, she was back at her father's office, sitting in a meeting, her plain dress replaced with another simple outfit. Nobody mentioned the night before. They didn't need to. The way people looked at her now, cautious, respectful, said enough. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence carried weight, her presence enough to shift the room. A junior assistant dropped a file on her desk, her hands shaking slightly, and whispered, "I saw the news. You were incredible." Olivia nodded, her expression unchanged, but her eyes softened for a moment before she turned back to her work. Years ago, she had stood in a different room, a smaller one, with her father. He had been signing papers, his pen moving quickly across the page. She was 16, her hair tied back, her sneakers scuffed from running around the estate. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," he had said, not looking up from his work. "Just be you. That's enough." She had nodded, her hands in her pockets, and carried those words with her ever since. That memory flickered in her eyes sometimes, like when she saw a car like the one her father used to drive, or when she heard someone laugh the way he did. Once, at a stoplight, she had paused, her hand on the wheel, watching a black sedan pull away, its tail lights glowing like the ones she had chased as a kid. The Harringtons' downfall didn't end with the gala. Trevor's face was everywhere, his smirk replaced with a look of defeat. He tried to post an apology online, but the comments tore him apart. Marissa's social circle shrank, her invitations to galas drying up. She was seen at a coffee shop a week later, alone, her designer bag looking out of place as she stared at her phone. Richard's company lost contracts, investors pulling out one by one. Claire's Instagram posts about the gala were deleted, her followers dropping as the backlash grew. Derek, the cousin with the crooked tie, was quietly let go from his job, his name erased from the family's website. The family's name, once a symbol of untouchable power, was now a cautionary tale. Olivia kept moving forward. She didn't read the headlines, didn't check the trending hashtags. She was too busy working, sitting in on meetings, reviewing contracts, her voice steady as she spoke. Her father trusted her, always had. She had grown up watching him navigate rooms like the one at the gala, watching him stay calm when others lost their nerve. She had learned from him not just how to talk business, but how to carry herself when the world tried to tear her down. At a board meeting a week later, an executive hesitated before addressing her, his voice careful. "Ms. Olivia, your input on the new strategy?" She nodded, her pen tapping lightly on the table, and gave her thoughts, her words precise and unshakable. "You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when someone looks at you and decides you're less, when they laugh, thinking they've got you figured out. But you know who you are. You know your worth. You're not alone in that." Olivia's story isn't just hers, it's yours too. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.